everybody. Today I've got a sweet set of figures up for review, and that's all three of these, the Final Edition Beastbox figures. I've done reviews for a couple of these guys, and today I'm bringing them together to take a look at details of these as a set. 52 Toys hasn't announced any sort of criteria or game plan for how many of these they intend to release, and there's nothing else in development, at least as far as we know. So I'm hoping they do release more. Personally, I'd love it if they made it a tradition to eventually retire all of their molds with a Final Edition send-off. I'm going to try to keep this video pretty short and sweet, but for a quick rundown, I'll touch on the packaging, talk about some figure details, I'll give a box grade for all three of these, and then I'll close it out with some final thoughts. So jumping right in, we'll take a look at these packages. They all come in a compact style box with an outer sleeve, and the figure comes transformed in its cube mode. On the inside, the front of the interior box has die-cast cutout artwork of the figure around the cellophane window, and along the sides with that great slogan, "Open the box, release the beast." Very cool. Faction symbols on the side, cool artwork all the way around. There's also a matte black cardstock insert in the back here with the Terminus logo on it. Something I thought is interesting is these instruction booklets. If you've been collecting Beastboxes for a while and hadn't really dipped into the earliest figures like I have, you'll note there's quite a bit of a difference between these and the instructions with later releases. In this case, they actually photographed unpainted prototypes of each figure, as opposed to the line art illustrations that are much more typical. They also have descriptive bilingual instructions in Chinese and English, so a little bit different of a style than what you're probably used to seeing. All three of these have a unique accent color, which happen to look pretty nice together. That's a nice attention to detail. Moving on, the counterpart to the figures themselves is of course their box chargers, and for the Final Edition series, these are of course very distinctive, with opaque white panels and stylized skull and crossbone Terminus logos on the front. In case you're not familiar, box chargers are storage for the figures. They have a nice latch mechanism, they can connect sideways or be stacked vertically very easily, and they hold together extremely well. It's a really good design. And that brings us back to the figures. Something else that's interesting to me about the Final Edition series is repaints of an existing mold would normally have a unique identifying alphanumeric designation. For example, for the Monkey King version of BB-03 Jojo, that one is BB-03 MK for Monkey King. Final Editions don't have that. Obviously, these figures are visually very distinctive, and you really only have that Final Edition designation on the packaging. So my best guess is the reason why these are not designated as BB-03FE, BB-04FE, and BB-05FE is done very deliberately. They're intended to represent the death of the original character. Whoa, this just got heavy. So yeah, first release of this series was BB-05 Delta. This one was released, I think, early last year. Then you have BB-03 Jojo, which came out roughly in the middle of the year. Jojo is an interesting one because as far as I can tell, it's been a pretty successful figure. They've had a ton of repaints for this guy, and it seems to be a mainstay for the Beastbox line. So the decision making behind however 52 Toys decides to retire certain figures is kind of a curiosity to me. And finally, the most recent, which is BB-04 Moma. This one arrived late last year. I kind of get why this one was retired because it really hasn't had much retail presence, at least over the past couple of years. The sense I get is it just hasn't really sold that well. So again, between Moma and Delta, I know I've said this before, the great thing about the Final Edition series is it's overall a really nicely designed theme, and I like the look and style of it enough to buy into older figures that I never really would have considered. Along with that, I've gotten a better appreciation for these earlier character designs, which on their own are really distinctive from later releases. So on that subject, let's talk about their style. All of these were clearly designed by the same designer, and he gave them a distinctively identifiable unified look and feel. For example, there's an abundant presence of, I guess you might call this a flathead screwdriver component, which to me is pretty evocative of that late century beefy machine and overall aesthetic you often saw in movies and pop culture in the 80s and 90s. And I think that unified design language definitely helped 52 Toys to distinguish their branding for all of these earliest releases. I'm not going to get into the quality of the figure transformation too much. I'll touch on that a bit when I get into the box grade, but it's worth a mention that the engineering isn't quite all there with these early releases. They're a little bit floppy, the box modes aren't quite as solid as more recent releases, and not especially easy to pose. Out of all these, I think Jojo has the most going for it in that regard, and that's probably partly why he was so popular. It's a well-balanced anthropomorphic figure with quite a bit of posability. The other two, not so much. You know, looking at these three together, I think that might be where a big shift in their figure concept design might have started to happen. For me, a figure that looks neat sitting on a shelf that you could pick up and fill around with every now and then is really all I care for. But I think 5.2 Toys must have realized that people, especially kids, want to be able to play with these things. So as the line matured, you definitely saw that shift towards more features and gimmicks, making them more like action figures. A perfect example of that is right here. The original Jojo did not come with any accessories, but with subsequent repaints you started to see a bit more of that. As far as styling, yeah, it's a lot of transparent plastic. You got a lot of transparent whites and red, with smoky semi-transparent and solid blacks. Which to me is evocative of a corporeal body that's sort of revealing its internal structure as it's starting to vanish from this plane of existence. Sort of like it's becoming a ghost. In addition to the styling that tied together the earliest Beastbox releases, there are unifying graphic design cues for the final editions. The clock motif is prevalent, kind of a time is up theme, except for Jojo. I suppose they couldn't find space to add that graphic on him. They all have a thank you 88, which as I understand is sort of a hybrid dialect that means thank you, bye bye. Of course they've all got the skull and crossbones Terminus logo, which is on the backs of the prehistoric fellas here and on Jojo's chest. They all have silver eyes, and each has unique markings that complement the contours and geometry of each particular figure. You've got these interesting white marks on Jojo's forearms, and these interesting geometric patterns on his thighs. Gorilla on the side in block letters. Delta has this nice semicircular prehistoric life. Really cool. Triceratops, of course, some interesting other little graphics and things around on this figure. Moma has a lot of interesting geometric shapes on his legs. Prehistoric life again. Mammothus, I guess that's Latin. Another prehistoric life, and well, it's spelled Elvery, but it's meant to say no more ivory trade. Tube on the trunk, really cool. So with these three first final edition releases, they're tied together with not only the final edition design style, but also the unified design language that was apparent with the earliest Beastboxes. And between those two aspects, I think all of these look like they really belong together, and it is really a great look. Now we'll go ahead and give these guys a box grade. This is my rating system of 6 categories, up to 5 points each for a total of 30 points possible. Beastboxes have always had charming character designs, and that is definitely not lacking in these earlier figures. I really can't say I favor one over the others, and being final edition releases, they not only look great, but they have that extra background story that I think is pretty darn cool. That pushes this score to the maximum of 5 points each. Like I mentioned before, the earliest Beastboxes really didn't have much going for them as far as playability. For me personally, that's immaterial, but as compared to later releases, there's less to work with here. 3, 2, and 2 points respectively. All of their transformations strike a really nice balance between being fun and easy to do, and completely unique to their own physical proportions. One thing nice about their cube modes is the physical characteristics are mostly right there on the surface. But, while they all definitely form a 2-inch cube, their box modes are kind of flimsy. 3 points across the board. For articulation, again, these are early Beastbox designs, so posability is generally pretty limited, with the exception of Jojo. Along with multiple points of articulation, this is a really well-balanced figure that's easy to pose in a variety of ways that realistically emulates a gorilla. 4, 2, and 2 points respectively. Build quality is good, but not exceptional, and one thing you do have to keep in mind is, these are all mostly made of transparent plastic, and, as you probably know, transparent plastic does tend to be a bit more fragile. Although, other than Moma's detached headpiece, which was a manufacturing defect I covered in its review, I really haven't had any issues with these. 3 points across the board. For me, the enjoyment I get out of a figure like this is just how damn cool they look. The final edition series was well thought out, tastefully done, and I love it. But putting cards on the table, these are all great for a shelf, but for action figures, part of a diorama, not quite so much. 3 points across the board. That brings the box grade total to 21, 18, and 18 points respectively. A couple of final notes. I'll say that you could almost consider Terminus to be a divergent reality to Beastboxes, as Shattered Glass is to Transformers. I love the overall look, the style, tastefully applied graphics, and color scheme. And 5.2 Toys, if you're listening, I hope you're going to continue this series, because I'll buy them all. Even regular release molds that I might have skipped, as evidenced by 2 of the 3 figures in this review. In the meantime, one thing Beastbox collectors are definitely debating is which Beastbox will be the next to be retired with a final edition release. So, who's it gonna be?
All I want to know is, who's coming with me?
So what do you think the next final edition will be? And what would you like to see released in this series? Let me know with a comment. Thanks so much for your time. If you made it to the end and you enjoyed this review, help out my channel by clicking that like button or subscribe if you haven't already. In the meantime, have yourself an awesome day and I'll catch you in the next one.